Good morning. We will be finishing 1 Samuel together today. If you've not been reading along, please go back and watch the playlist here on Bear Independent, Old Testament playlist. But more importantly, get your Bible out. Read it with your eyes. Pray over it with your heart. Talk to your Creator about it. Do not take my word for it. See it with your own eyes. Receive it with your own heart. Roughly page 312 in the scriptures. And the Philistines gathered all the enemies of Aphek, while Israel encamped by a fountain which is in Yisrael. And the princes of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Akish. And the princes of the Philistines said, "Who are these Hebrews?" And Akish said to the princes of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, who has been with me these days or these years? And on this day I found no evil in him since he came over." But the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him, and the princes of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back. Let him return to the place which you have appointed for him, and do not let him go down with us to battle, lest in battle he becomes our adversary. For with what could he appease his master, if not with the heads of these men?" So we have this convoluted issue here where David is in service to Akish. Akish is part of the Philistines, but David used to work for Saul, King Saul, or Shaul. And now the Philistines are going to war with Shaul, and these princes of the Philistines are like, "We're not bringing that guy into battle, because just because you trust him doesn't mean we trust him. And what better way to serve his king, Saul, and for us to get into battle, to have this guy in our rear. And now we've got this, we're being ambushed from the rear by somebody we thought was our friend, but actually is our enemy." I've mentioned before that this Bible has been studied for thousands of years, for thousands of reasons. And one of the reasons that it is consistently studied is for military tactics. This is a good point here. The princes of the princes of the Philistines do not trust David. "Is this not David of whom they sang to each other in dances, saying, 'Shaul struck his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Akish called David and said to him, 'As Yahweh lives, you have been straight, and your going out and your coming in with me and my army is good in my eyes.'" Going out and coming in is a phrase used in the Old Testament that meant going to war. So Akish is like, "As Yah lives, you and me are good, and you going to war with me has been good. We're straight. For this day I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming to me, but in the eyes of the princes you're not good. And now return and go in peace, and do no evil in the eyes of the princes of the Philistines." And David said to Akish, "But what have I done? And this day, what have you found in your servant as long as I have been with you, that I should not go and not fight against the enemies of my master, the king?" But Akish answered and said to David, "I know that you are as good in my eyes as a messenger of Elohim. You're an angel, David. In my eyes, you're an angel. But the princes of the Philistines have said, 'Let him not go up with us to battle.' And now rise early in the morning with your master's servants who have come with you. And as soon as you are up early in the morning and have light, then go." And David and his men rose up early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Yisrael. And it came to be, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag, and struck Ziklag and burned it with fire. And they took captive the women and those who were there from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but they led them away and went their way. Now what's going on here with the Amalekites? The Philistines have unasked their AO. They have gotten up and moved from their area to go fight the Israelites. But the Amalekites see that the Philistines are no longer in their AO, so while the cat's away, the mice will play. So the Amalekites have come into the Philistines area now that the Philistines have left their area to go fight Israel, and they've left their rear flank open. Well, David's coming back, and he finds that the Amalekites have invaded the south and Ziklag and struck Ziklag and burnt it. I need some more coffee. This is in no way an advertisement, but this is the Bear Blend from Disaster Coffee, and it is freaking wonderful. Oh yeah, that's stout. And they took captive, back in verse 2 of 30. And they took captive the women and those who were there from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but they led them away and went their way. And David and his men came to the city and saw it burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. And David and the other people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept, and they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives, Ahinoam and the Israelites, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, had been taken captive. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in Yahweh, his Elohim. And David said to Abiathar, the priest, the son of Ahimelech, all the way back at the story of David, we get into Abiathar. I can never say that guy's name right. Abiathar, and who was the son of Ahimelech, who was slaughtered by Saul for assisting David. So David said to Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, please bring the shoulder garment here to me. So Abiathar brought the shoulder garment to David. And David inquired of Yahweh, saying, do I pursue this band? Do I overtake them? And he, Yahweh, answered, pursue, for you shall certainly overtake them, and certainly rescue. So David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and he came to the Wadi Besor, where a halt was made by those who were left behind. While David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 halted, who were too faint to pass over the Wadi Besor. And they found a man in the field, a Mitzrian, an Egyptian, and took him to David. And they gave him bread, and he ate, and they let him drink water. And they gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his strength came back to him, for he had not eaten bread nor drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? And he said, I'm a young man from Mitzrayim, a servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind, for I had been sick 3 days. We attacked the south of the Kerethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. So they find this guy in the field. He's not in good condition. And they capture him. They treat him well. And because they treat him well, they bring him back to health. He's now providing intel to them. Again, from a military standpoint, this makes a ton of sense. It also makes a ton of sense in the games of power that we play as human beings. This dude was along for the ride that resulted in David's home being burnt. He's almost stoned to death. His wife and his children are gone, and everybody else's wives and children are gone. The natural inclination could be to just kill this guy, but he's full of valuable information. And so, not only is it Torah to feed this guy, it's tactically prudent, strategically prudent to keep him alive. And David said to him, "Could you bring me down to this marauding band? Do you know where they are?" And he said, "Swear to me by Elohim that you neither kill me nor surrender me into the hands of my master. Then I bring you down to this marauding band." And this Egyptian says, "Yeah, if you swear to Yah, you're not going to kill me and you're not going to give me back to them because they'll kill me too, then yes, I will do that." And he brought him down and saw they were spread out over all the land, eating and drinking and celebrating because of the great spoil which they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them from twilight until the evening of the next day, and none of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. And David rescued all that the Amalekites had taken. David also rescued his 2 wives, and there was none missing to them, whether small or great, whether sons or daughters or spoil or whatever they had taken from them. David recovered all. Besides, David captured all the flocks and herds they had driven before those livestock, and they said, "This is David's spoil." Remember that the Amalekites didn't just hit Ziklag. They hit Judah, they hit Caleb, they hit other areas. And so they had spoils that exceeded what was taken at Ziklag, where David and his people were at. And David came to the 200 men who were too faint to follow David, who had also been left at the Wadi Besor. And they went out to meet David and to the people who were with him. And when David came near the people, he greeted them. And all the evil and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, "This is interesting." It means that there were men with David who had evil and worthless tendencies. Now, we don't know if they were constantly, consistently evil and worthless. My guess is if they were with David, they weren't, but we can certainly see that they had evil and worthless tendencies. Because in verse 22, "And all the evil and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, because they did not go with us, we do not give them any of the spoil that we have rescued, except for every man's wife and children, and let them take them and go." But David said, "My brothers, do not do so with what Yahweh has given us, who had protected us and gave us into our hand the band that came against us. And who would listen to you in this matter? For as his portion is who goes down to battle, so is his portion who remains with the baggage. They share alike." And it came to be, from that day forward, he appointed it for a law and a right ruling in Israel to this day. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, to his friends, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of Yahweh." Remember, Judah was hit, Judah was struck by the Amalekites. So David, being sent from the rear of this movement that's taking place by the Philistines against Israel, actually gets back to Ziklag and sees that the Amalekites were up to some shenanigans. So he goes and deals with the Amalekites, and they'll leave with more than they came with. They'll leave with more than what they had in the first place. And then he takes some of that spoil, sends it back to Judah, which had been attacked by the Amalekites. So he's restoring them as well. He's actually, rather than going to war with Israel, he's restoring favor with Israel, while Akish and the Philistines are out there going to battle. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, to his friends, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of Yahweh. to those in Bethel, and to those in Ramoth of the south, and to those in Yatir, and those in Aroer, and those in Sephmoth, and those in Eshtemoa, and to those in Rakal, and to those in the cities of the Yacheramites, and to those in the city of the Canaanites, and to those in Hormah, and to those in Korashan, and to those in Atach, and to those in Hebron, and all the places where David had gone up and down, he and his men. David was building rapport in all the places he had been. He and his men shared the spoil. 31. And the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard after Shaul and his sons. So this is what's going on where Akish and the Philistines are, as David has returned back to Ziklag. And the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard after Shaul and his sons, the king, King Saul. And the Philistines struck Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, sons of Shaul. Remember Jonathan, Jehonathan, and David were buds, like besties. They had a covenant. And the battle went hard against Shaul, and the archers hit him, so that he was severely wounded by the archers. And Shaul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and roll themselves on me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. So Shaul took the sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Shaul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. Thus Shaul died, and 3 of his sons, and his armor-bearer, also all his men together on that day. And they saw, the men of Israel, who were beyond the valley, and those who were beyond the Jordan, that the men of Israel had fled, and that Shaul and the sons were dead. So they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt on them. So a lot of Israel bugged out because it didn't go their way for the military. Again, super practical, tactical here. They left because of overwhelming force. It's one of the things we talk about on the preparedness side of Bear Independent. Bug out indicators. Well, I'll never have to leave. I live in the paradise in the middle of the woods. Overwhelming force is a great reason to have to leave, and Israel did. And they saw the men of Israel who were beyond the valley and those who were beyond the Jordan, that the men of Israel had fled, and that Shaul and his sons were dead. So they forsook the cities and fled. They bugged out, bro. And the Philistines came and dwelt in them. And the next day it came to be, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Shaul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to announce in the house of their idols unto the people. And they placed his armor in the house of Ashtaroth. And they fastened his body on the wall of Beth Shan. And the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had done to Shaul. And all the brave men arose and went all night and took the body of Shaul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth Shan. And they came to Yavesh, and they burned them there. They took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Yavesh, and fasted for 7 days. So Shaul and his sons are killed in battle. It's one problem solved for David, but not without a lot of heartache. Because again, remember, Jonathan and David were tight. The Philistines take the bodies of Saul and his sons as a trophy, and Israel takes them back, gives them their last rites, and then fasts and laments for them. It's interesting. They placed his armor in the house of Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth. I would encourage you in your journey towards a fullness of understanding of this word, especially considering the timing of this video, to research Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth and Ishtar, 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 are very closely connected. And Ishtar is Easter. It's pagan fertility worship, which we are commanded not to do. You can see here that Ashtaroth, Ishtar, does not belong to Yah. It belongs to the Philistines. It's a false god. It's one of their idols that Israel, us, were commanded to destroy. And because of political reasons, Ishtar, as well as a whole bunch of other pagan bullcrap, has been added back into Christianity to get heathens to worship Yah. But they're not worshiping Yah, are they? That was the logic of men, not the logic of Yah. We will pick up in 2 Samuel 1 next time we read together. Bless y'all. Shalom.